So we're gonna go do the rest of the drops today. I've already dropped 2 farmers markets and we're on our way to number 3 and number 4. Before we get to number 3, which is the Uptown Farmers Market, I have to stop and fill up the gas tank for my crew member who will be driving this truck back. We're doing a little bit of a weird thing today where typically I do the whole delivery route and return back to home base. And then one of our other crew members takes the truck back out and picks everything up. But I'm doing what I've done more weeks than not and staying at the downtown Phoenix market today and running it with Amanda. So this is my market. It was the second market that we added as a business. So we started at this market called the Gilbert Market. And it's actually the market that the bakery already was at before we had bought it. When we were first baking, we were trying to figure out when it is that we should join a second market. And really it was at the time that we started that we saw a whole lot of potential in farmers markets here in general. Phoenix is unique to many places. You wouldn't necessarily consider Phoenix a haven for farmers markets, but in the last decade I think that has held true, that Phoenix has become this new haven for farmers markets, and it's still a relatively young farmers market scene. The first markets popped up here only 25 years ago, whereas there are running markets that are, I think there's some markets around the US that are over 100 years old, I believe, and certainly around the world there's markets that are hundreds and hundreds of years old. Perhaps there's still areas that have been concurrently running as markets in the world that are more than hundreds of years old, perhaps in the thousands. Although I don't know those for offhand. I just imagine that there's places in the world that have been conducting commerce that have never really stopped conducting commerce in a particular area. When we first started, we wanted to try to figure out what it is that we were as a bakery. At the time that we bought Proof, the original baker, Jared, had a few restaurants that he was baking for, one of which was 7 days a week. And then he had the Gilbert Farmers Market on Saturdays. The thing that we found sort of odd right away was that baking 7 days a week, the vast majority of the revenue was coming in on Saturday morning. So we were working the other days and baking for the other days, and we were actually delivering bread 7 days a week. Yet it was already at that time something like 70% of the revenue was Saturday mornings. The restaurants ordered more on Saturdays themselves, and then the bulk of our business was being done at the market level. And then it turned out that working with restaurants was particularly difficult for us as new bakers. They wanted things to look identical. Every roll, every ciabatta roll really needed to look identical. And ciabatta is not particularly uniform as a product around the world. If you look at kind of shape, size, height of ciabatta, it's more or less a blob of dough just sort of baked. So the idea of consistent ciabatta is really only something that industrial bakeries seem to do really well, or at the very least bakeries that have reached I think we could do ciabatta rolls very consistently now with what we know now about fermentation and about all the science, and with all the control that we have over temperature and timing that we've developed over time. When we first started, baking for restaurants was really difficult. Not only did they want the best product, meaning their tolerance for product variance was much lower than market customers, they also wanted to pay less than half the cost of bread as market customers did, which would have limited us to white industrial flour, quite frankly. That's what Proof used before, and that's where we would have really needed to stay to keep prices consistent with wholesale bread. So I'm going to fill up the gas tank here on this big boy. Not everybody has debit cards, and so as you can imagine, I don't expect my crew member to have to fill up this gas tank. It's a little bit more expensive than the typical gas tank to fill. When we first started, I remember going to a farmer's market, actually the market that we'll be working today. It was one of my first few weeks there as a vendor. It was probably September in 2017. And this other bread company, Arizona Bread Co., showed up. And they showed up with a truck much like this. And some crew unloaded the bread on these bread dollies, which you'll actually see us have. Hang on, there's a technical glitch with the all right. I promise that I bake bread a little bit better than I fill gas, apparently. There we go. Okay, so I remember seeing Arizona Bread Co. show up with their big truck and use a lift gate to unload bread. And I was just thinking about our setup at the time, where we had bread in kind of the final display crates that we had bought, just like wooden milk crates that we would stagger and display beautifully on a table. And all the bread was just sort of packed in these crates and put in the back of our cars, our regular cars. It was definitely not ideal. Crumbs everywhere, just generally using a car to run a business that you also use to transport your family is not fun, but it's where we were at. So we tried to get a trailer as quickly as we could to haul things. We had a Toyota Prius, which wasn't all that spacious, and we had a truck, an F-150. You weren't allowed to put any food in the back of the truck on the bed, so we put all the bread in the back seat. It was like whatever. It's called not crew cabs, but the full size, full cab, and so I would put the seats down and put all the bread in there, and then put like the tables and all that in the bed. Well, it was working for a few weeks, but I knew we'd sort of outgrow that very quickly. So we got a trailer, which initially took every dollar that we had. We had just bought the bakery, and we still had our day jobs, fortunately. So, but the bakery was sort of funding all these like mini improvements. We didn't have any staff yet, so I got this trailer so that we could get to markets, and it was one of the first moves that sort of started the process of becoming a market bakery. Going to one farmer's market doesn't make you a market bakery. I think going to one farmer's market, you can do it in the back of your Prius, frankly. We did. If you go through the photos that we have, now I didn't fill this guy up fully, so it is a full tank now, but it had probably a half a tank, so it costs about $100 to fill this up, if you're wondering what it costs to fill up a truck like this. And so again, if you're a one market bakery, don't buy a 20-foot box truck. It's dumb. It's not something that we've had this truck for a year, and I'd love to continue the story of how in the world we ended up with this fancy truck. It's a worthwhile sort of thing to go through, but it happened organically. And there's some crazy highlights to come, like smoke coming out of a diesel truck in your face as you're driving suddenly after some minor explosion in the diesel engine dealing with cooling. So we've had sort of fun times before this truck, but we are doing this business for the long haul, and we are a market bakery. So at some point it made a lot of sense to make an investment in a nice truck. So right now I'm updating Amanda, who's working market with me. She'd like to know what time I need her there. But I'm gonna open up WhatsApp, which is what we use to communicate as a team. It's the one place where Androids and iPhones can have group names together. So we have a market chat. This is specific to all the people that sort of work at the markets with us. And I'm just gonna let everybody know that I'm on my way to the Uptown Market with a truck and give my ETA. We're right on time this morning. And I'm gonna go back to the story of the truck and why you should get a decent vehicle for your company when the time's right. We started with a trailer and really quickly kind of encountered issues with the trailer. First off, it is a pain to haul a trailer around a city. It's actually a necessary evil, and a lot of market vendors use trailers. So there's nothing wrong with a trailer, but it's hard. It's hard getting in and out of parking lots. Oftentimes markets are in cities where parking is limited, and things bounce around a lot in a pull-behind trailer. So we had some incidents of product getting damaged in transit, which is really the most devastating thing. We, at that time, were still baking right up to the finish line, just to the last moment. In fact, it's 5:30 right now, and chances are that we would have been leaving right now in two independent cars. So one car going to Phoenix and the other car going to Gilbert to run the markets. And it was stressful because the market starts at 7 a.m. It's 5:40. So the idea of leaving the bakery right now with product that's piping hot out of the oven, maybe it's charming, but I also think that it's life shortening for the baker to run under that kind of stress week in and week out. Our Friday nights would start at 10 p.m. and run through the night. This was the sort of the model that we walked into when we took over the bakery. And that model was necessary due to the lack of equipment and the crazy weather in our city. I also started around this time, in the summertime. We bought the bakery in the summer of 2017. Well, basically baking when the high is 117 like it is now. The high today will be 117, and our low, our awesome low here, is 90 degrees right now. So imagine baking in that environment, because our original garage was not air conditioned. So we would open up the door from the house to the garage and try to blow some cold air from the house into the garage. Really the whole time everything's been sacrificial towards personal life. We have a nice truck, but we had really awful personal cars. We now have one semi-decent car. Actually, it's a very nice car that we got ourselves last winter as a sort of reward, but the truck predated the car, no question. Anyhow, so we were baking all night because of how hot the bakery was getting. When it gets that hot, the only way to go through a sourdough process is to go relatively fast. We sort of understood what it would be like to be a yeast-based bakery, although not really, because even then, the sourdough products were still basically functioning on very close to an 8-hour cycle, even though it was super hot all the way through. You know, we're mixing our bread on Friday morning and then baking it beginning overnight on Friday. relatively quickly. But we were doing things like mixing croissant dough on Friday morning, then laminating, shaping, and proofing all night on Friday night, baking right before the deadline at market. And we were really frustrated that we never got that honeycomb crumb in our sourdough croissant. The thing is, we never allowed ourselves enough time to get the honeycomb crumb to begin with. So the parameters under which the bakery functioned when we bought it made it impossible to do a sourdough croissant correctly. So naturally I tried to find answers within first the schedule framework that we were working under. So I tried to perfect lamination and sort of toiled away at lamination to the point that lamination what was happening before Friday night, just to try to get that right. And little did I know that the answer really lied in the final proof, for which we didn't have enough time. We allowed maybe 3 or 4 hours, and it really required 7 or 8 to get right. So baking all night long was sort of the necessity at the beginning, and we would throw this stuff on our personal vehicles and get to market running on pure adrenaline. The market allowed its own form of energy, because that was the moment where all of our customers got to, come and show their smiling faces and be excited. And it was really living through their excitement that got us through those moments, because there's really no way to describe the schedule in anything other than a single word of grueling. Typically during the summer we would start at 10 p.m. and then bake through the night, and then go to market during the morning, be out at market during the hot part of the summer, and then return in the afternoon to what was a messy bakery, because we were baking all the way up until the very last moment before we had to leave. So there was no time to clear down, and clearing down was after all of this craziness, after the adrenaline was long subsided, and now you're back home. You haven't slept all Friday and you still have to clean up. It was difficult, and the thing is that was sort of the easiest version of that, because our slowest time is also in the summertime. So that was our summertime schedule. But once we hit September, October, November, keep in mind that we were also baking for delivery on Friday morning. So we would get up at 2 in the morning on Friday morning and mix dough and deliver it later that morning, get back in the afternoon, 2 p.m. And then that 10 p.m. started to come backwards as we got into our first winter season. Now we needed to start at 6 p.m. in order to get it done. So now you have just a few hours break in between a 2 a.m. Friday start and that crazy overnight all-day haul on Saturday. And mind you, the starter had to be refreshed at 6 p.m. on Saturday evening, so I was ready by Sunday morning at 2 a.m. There's no employees in sight. There's no one else to do the work. It's you. 2 months into this adventure of the 24-hour days and the 7 days a week, I was driving with my pickup truck to the Phoenix Public Market, towing that trailer that we had just gotten for the $2,500 that it cost used. I hadn't slept in 24 hours. I've only caused 0 accidents up until that point. And the market finishes, it's noon, it's downtown Phoenix, there's a bunch of one-way roads, which is not something that I'm typically used to. The rest of the city is sort of normal 4-way stops everywhere. But there's a lot of 2-way stops because of all the one-way roads. So I'm in the heart of the city, pull up to a stop sign, and I sort of falsely assume that the oncoming traffic also has a stop sign. And so I stop, and then I pull forward with my pickup truck and the trailer, and there's a car coming like 30 miles per hour that can't stop all the way and hits sort of the tail of my truck, and the truck pivots, it hits the trailer as well, leaves a big dent in the trailer. I'm able to pull home, so I take the truck to a repair shop, and they classify as totaled because I bought this old truck. I wasn't investing in new cars at the time, and so the truck basically wasn't worth fixing. I guess the side frame had gotten impacted even though I was able to drive it home, and so it was considered totaled. And so now here I own a bakery that needs to get to markets. I own a trailer that has a giant dent in it, but it still otherwise functions. It's my only source of transportation to the markets. I need to get to the market next week because it's now becoming, even though I have a job still, and so does Amanda, we have started to take risks. We bought a trailer, and we, have all these expenses, and actually, moreover, we have customers to please. I'm very much living through the lens of the customer sort of praising us on Saturday morning and loving what we're doing. That's what's keeping me going, keeping this cycle of learning and growing as a baker going, because otherwise it's nutty. No sleep, it was a combination of doing something that I truly love and getting great feedback for doing it. Meanwhile, on the restaurant side, I was getting the exact opposite. I was getting a lot of really bad feedback. I was getting yelled at every day by chefs. They were the last to put in their order, so we would wake up in the morning, and that's when we found out what we were making for the day. It's nutty. Waking up at 2 in the morning and not having that email until then that tells you, oh, today I'm gonna need 100 ciabatta. Going into your garage, mixing 100 ciabatta, shaping 100 ciabatta, delivering all in one go, and getting text messages starting at 8 in the morning. Where are you? Where are you? Where are you? Well, frankly, sourdough bread takes longer to make than that. 6 hours is not enough time. And so we were really setting ourselves up for a bad situation to begin with. Bottom of the barrel pricing. And so we were sort of looking at ourselves, wondering, why are we making all of this product 7 days a week for $700 a week of weekly invoicing for our best restaurant account? That was the best one. Now, there are restaurants that will buy way more bread than that. So I'm not saying that you can't become a restaurant baker successfully. There are many people that do it. However, they're going to try to buy bread at prices that you can't afford to make them bread at. If they're buying a lot of bread, then you're going to be at price points of like 30 cents a bun. Good luck. I don't know that I can make a bun for less than that and make a return. And at this point, we've invested a lot into our infrastructure. I don't think I can do it yet. So at some point, we decided to become a market bakery because that was where people were willing to pay the price point that we needed to make the quality bread that we believed in. It was what paved the way to the quality flour and all the quality along with it. So as we were going, we were learning we need more time to bake. And so at first, we just added more hours that we were baking during, but we were still baking all the way to that deadline. And then our sort of used cars that were not suited for transportation started to have to take more of a brunt. Now I lost my pickup truck, and I'm driving to the markets in an auction car because we went on the auction the next week and we bought some random thing for $1,600 that could tow a trailer, just anything that could tow a trailer. It was like a 2006 Chevy Equinox that had 220,000 miles on it, and God knows what problems with it. It started, and that's all that mattered. it was really a disposable car if you think about it, because of that high mileage. Of course, it had problems right away. It was leaky, and we didn't have time to service it either. We're baking 7 days a week. We were working 7 days a week. We're starting to try to hire people, bring people on, and there's just no time for extras like servicing cars. So by the time Saturday morning rolled around, when this major delivery route that basically all of our livelihoods were starting to depend on, rested on, this car just wasn't reliable. So the first chance we got, we went on auction again and we bought another unreliable SUV as a backup. It was a huge Ford Excursion, the biggest Ford. And the cool thing about that car was we started to use the inside and the trailer. So it was pulling the trailer, we would load the inside with one market and load the trailer with another market. And so now the Ford Excursion became our first delivery vehicle because it could handle 2 markets on its own with the trailer. So I started to drop the trailer at Gilbert, and we would take the Ford Excursion to the Phoenix market, park it, and unload it by hand. So it was still loading up in all these wooden crates and just fill the whole Excursion for the market. I couldn't sell more product even if I would have customers to buy it because there was only so much product that could fit in the Ford Excursion's rear. It too started to have problems. In fact, the first time I needed to bring it in for an oil change, I brought it in for a full checkup. And I brought it into this place that sort of took it back and just did a comprehensive look at it and came back to me and said, well, sir, if you'd like to get this Ford Excursion up to roadworthy standards, it's going to be about $2,800, which is $200 more than I paid for the Ford Excursion to begin with. So then I asked, well, what can I do to just make sure it doesn't break on me? And that ended up being $800 of just mandatory things that needed to happen. So that's what we did. Well, we ran that thing for the entire winter season that year with the trailer and everything. We added a third market in January of that first year, which was nutty. It's too fast to add a second market 3 months after you buy a bakery and to buy a third market 8 months after you buy a bakery. I don't recommend it. For us though, it was a massive improvement because that was when we got out of 7 days a week of restaurant orders. We dropped that biggest account, and that biggest account was still $3,000 a month of revenue. It was a hard thing to walk away from. It was a notable restaurant in town that we still have a good relationship with today. Trying to navigate how to break up without sort of burning that bridge, even though we were really unhappy at the time, deeply, deeply unhappy. I don't hold anything against that restaurant. In fact, we work with them now on a farmer's market. But that dynamic of their needs and our needs was just very incongruent. We needed customers that appreciated what we had at the time, which was hand-mixed bread, literally mixed in a trough, made last minute, baked in a pizza oven, which is super inconsistent, no steam, in a bakery that didn't have any air conditioning, that was in our garage. There's nothing about that. And then new bakers to boot. People that have been baking for a few months and had had 2 or 3 weeks of training with the previous baker, whom, by the way, had only been baking for a few years himself. So the whole concept of being a wholesale restaurant bakery really made no sense, because what we learned right away was the only way to make a living as a wholesale bakery was to make a lot of bread very frequently. It's costly to deliver bread. You can see that right now, delivering market bread, we have this truck. And this truck costs a lot of money to own. It's one of two things that we owe on, that we chose to buy on loan. And we did that because of how much it was costing to have really crappy vehicles before this. So the Ford Excursion randomly seized up on us one day because it was so leaky and awful that one week we just weren't paying attention to our fluids and it ran out of engine oil. We turned it on, drove it down the street, and there goes the Ford Excursion. It just ended up becoming a liability at that point because we had to get it towed and we had to get, all of it filed that it wasn't reparable. It's just bad news. So at that time, I was still on that auction site looking every week, and here comes a 2003 Ford E450 box truck. Again, it had 160,000 miles, so I was upgrading, and I thought, diesel, that's not a lot of miles for diesel, I heard. So I sprung for it. This one cost me over $4,000 to buy. And drove it home. I got to preview it before I bought it, so I went to the auction yard and you could turn it on and you could drive it around the parking lot. I noticed that the AC was blowing a little warm, but I hoped that a little Freon could fix that problem. Turns out it was a lot more than Freon, so we had a box truck that didn't have AC, that was a diesel in the summertime, a little over a year into baking, so summer of 2018, and that was pretty rough too. So something about van style box trucks is that the engine, just like this one, basically is underneath us. So actually more of the engine was in front, but it just had a very small compartment here, so a lot of the engine was tucked underneath, and that thing heated up. So driving it, it was 20 degrees hotter in the cab than outside. And so imagine it's over 100 outside and now you're driving this box truck. I will have Amanda at the market comment on this later on video, I swear, because it's worth it to get her story of how ridiculous it was after pulling an all-nighter and an all-day the day before, because our bakery quickly graduated to baking all day and all night on Friday. That 6 p.m. kept inching backwards until it just melded right in with the morning shift for Friday, and you could hardly distinguish whether you're baking for Friday anymore or baking for Saturday. It was all the same. So now you're getting into a 140 degree cab at the end of farmer's market time on Saturday. It's just pure torture. It's pure torture. You don't even know what your baker is going through to try to scale up their garage bakery. And then we just ran that thing into the ground, that truck. So the evolution of the truck. First it's just a box truck, and then my dad arrived for the first winter of 2018 where we built our first edition. Nothing about any of this was comfortable, by the way. That $4,500 that I spent on the truck cash was like every last penny that we had at that time. It was like drained the account to the point that we hoped that next week's sales would cover labor and ingredients and all that. Everything about our life was just barely making it at that time. So we get to winter and we're planning to build an oven room. I should say I'm planning to build an oven room because Amanda, I'm not sure, was really on board until we first finally got going with it. And before my dad gets going, we're still filing the permits and all that. He sees this box truck and he starts remodeling the back, like builds out a whole set of construction, makes it seem like we'll never get rid of this box truck because of how much like personal touch he put into it. Just these custom shelves and everything strapped in nicely for the first time. But then we wanted to add a fourth market and we couldn't get any more on there. At the time we didn't have a lift gate or anything, so we would basically hand load all of our bread in bread crates that we sort of were able to get donated to us various ways, all kinds of mix and match bread transport crates. So we were hand loading the truck and then unloading onto dollies and then trying to wheel into the market. Well, the moment we added a fourth market, that didn't work anymore. Plus, I really wanted to do something with our displays. I wanted to build these bookshelves that would hold bread. I had my dad, and I felt like the time to build bookshelves was now, so he built me my first few bookshelves for an event, and then they just sat in our backyard because we didn't have a vehicle that we could transport them on. So we decided to buy our second trailer at that time. It was a utility trailer that the box truck could pull. So now I had a box truck plus a 14-foot utility trailer. And if you thought that my market vehicle was uncomfortable with the excursion plus the trailer, it was way more uncomfortable to pull a whole 14-foot utility trailer with an already big vehicle and a truck. But we basically put all of our supplies on the utility trailer and all the bread in the back of the truck, and that allowed us to get to 4 markets. That was awesome. 4 markets for us with employees was the first time that the bakery started to pay for itself and get into the green. It was the first time that we started to actually make a profit. I should say profit's a weak word because we were still heavily investing all that profit into our infrastructure, but we were doing that, and that was awesome. Except once I started pulling a utility trailer with this awful 2003 Ford E450, I'm going to put 6.0 diesel because I know somebody watching this video is going to appreciate how awful that engine is. The moment we started bringing it into mechanics office places to get worked on, half of them turned us away. They did not want to deal with the 6.0 diesel from Ford, the 2003. Apparently it's just one of the worst engines Ford's ever made. So it had all kinds of issues. One day my dad was actually driving it with my mom, and this was when we finally decided to, well, it wasn't when we decided to get rid of it, but shortly thereafter. They're driving it one day, and the coolant tank basically just bursts and explodes, and smoking all, and my mom's panicking because she just is not one for this kind of thing. It cost like $5,000 to replace whatever I needed to replace, and I decided to do it. It was a bad decision because 2 months later, something else goes wrong on market pickup, and now it's an $8,000 repair to get it roadworthy. And that's when that truck became a flour storage vessel for us for the next year, and we went and bought a new truck. So that's why $8,000 was too much. On top of it, we actually did the math. We went and calculated what we were paying in maintenance every month, plus the diesel, plus everything else. And then we calculated what it would cost to rent a truck, and it made sense to buy a new truck. I'm really happy I did. We have to pay for it every month, but in a few years it'll be paid off. And with how few miles we put on this now, I know that if we take care of this, I'm gonna have a vehicle for the next couple decades. Because frankly, all the vehicles I was using before this truck were a couple decades old. So here we go, we're at the Uptown Market, let's get going. So I'm gonna lock up first, make sure my cargo box light is on, make sure my lift gate's on, and make sure that this cab stays secure. So we're gonna close the door, lock it, and move on from there.